Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we are halfway through the functions inside of After Effects, and now we're back to learn our third function, which is the shape layers. Now, shape layers is obviously going to be the most complex one because you've actually got a few different kinds of shapes you can have, and each one's going to have different settings. It's not going to be as annoying as the text, because although the text is not too complex, it is just annoying. The shape layers are complex, but they're very useful because we're going to be using them like 90% of the time. Okay, so you better get used to them now, or else you're going to get used to them later. So this being said, let's dive right into After Effects and learn some shape layers. So how do we add a shape layer inside of After Effects? As you guys know, we have learned text and we have learned solids. And so far we learned that text you can stylize in three ways. You've got properties, you've got effects, and you've got the animator tools. And solids you can stylize in two ways. You've got the properties and you've got the effects which you add on top of it. Well, shape layers, you can stylize them a few ways. You can stylize them with the actual like properties of the shape layer themselves, or you can stylize them with effects, and both of them are really useful. Let's go ahead and get into it. So to actually create our shape layers, all we have to do is right click and click on new and click on shape layer. A shape layer is basically a layer that allows you to put any shape inside of it. It's literally in the name. It's an empty layer. So as I've added in the shape layer, as I make it invisible, you guys notice nothing changes. There's nothing on this shape layer because I haven't added a shape yet. I've just added a layer. So a shape layer, the first thing we need to understand is just a layer that allows a shape to be there. Okay, so we have a solid layer. When you add it, you get a solid inside of it. You have a text layer. When you add it, you get a text inside of it. A shape layer doesn't come with a shape. It's a layer that allows you to put a shape inside of it. Why is that? Well, it's mainly because this mask tool over here, which we use to draw out our shapes, if you apply this to any other layer like a solid, it actually masks out the solid. You can see if I hold this down, by the way, I get a bunch of different masks that pop in. If I use an ellipse like this, it draws out an ellipse, right? If I use a polygon or a star, it draws out a star. And that's if I apply it to any other solid. Now, what if we wanted to add this in but as a shape? So instead of adding it in as a full layer that's a solid, what if we wanted to actually draw a shape inside of our scene? What if I believed that it would be so good to have a square in here in the scene? Well, all I have to do is add in a shape layer so that we can now add in a shape into our scene. And we have to select between all of these masks or the pen tool. These are the two tools which you use to draw out shapes, and I will explain them one by one right now. We're going to get started with the rectangle. So you've got your rectangle, you've got a rounded rectangle, you've got ellipse, polygon, star, and you also have the pen tool if you guys want to be very creative with the pen, and we're also going to break that down in this episode. So let's get started with the rectangle tool. If I add in a shape layer and I draw out a rectangle, I get a rectangle, right? By the way, quick thing, in any of these masks, if you want a perfect dimensional shape, you just hold down shift and you draw out. You can see no matter where my cursor goes, it's going to make a perfect square. Okay, if I don't hold down shift, I can make whichever kind of rectangle I want. Let's say I draw out this rectangle here. What do I get? I get a rectangle. If I zoom into my scene, I can see it's literally just a rectangle. Nice and simple. Now, what's the special thing about shape layers? Well, the shape layer is obviously a shape that is on your scene. You can animate these, you could play around with them, you could do so much. Inside of your properties, you will find a ton of things to change, from the look of the shape layer all the way to the transform properties. Up top, you're going to find the transform properties, so your position, rotation, anchor point, opacity, all that cool stuff. And then under it, you're going to find the shape properties, and the shape properties have everything to do with the actual shape layer. And then you've got the transform of the shape. So you have three things. You've got the layer transform, so this is the transform of the entire layer. You've got the transform of the shape, so just like inside of Premiere Pro, how we've got a layer transform and then a transform inside of the layer, this is the same thing. So the layer transform affects the transform effect for the whole layer. So if you had two shapes on here, which I'll show you guys how to do, you could change both of them. But if you had one shape and you want to change one of them, this is your shape transform. Okay, your shape properties will change the size of your shape, the roundness if it's a rectangle. So each shape, by the way, has its own properties, but you could change the roundness of the rectangle like so. You could change the stroke color, the stroke width. You could change the corners if you wanted them to be round. You could change the kind of lines you're using, and you could change the color of the shape. So you guys can see if I move around my size, I change the size of my rectangle. If I increase the roundness, I make it more round. If I drop my stroke width, I can change the width of my stroke. If I make my stroke color white, I can change the color of my stroke. I can change both of these, which we will see later on, or I can change my fill color to a different color like this. And there we go. This being said, this is how you use the rectangle shape layer. Now you might be like, that's really simple. So let's go ahead and do that one more time for practice. To add in a shape layer, you can right click and add in a new shape layer. And then you can use your rectangle to draw out a shape like so. Now, since we've already applied these properties, it's going to automatically apply them to our rectangle. There's one thing that I do want to teach you guys is that we never really use the properties on the right side to change these things about our rectangle. We always just go down to the shape layer, go down to contents, and the contents of the shape layer holds whatever shape is inside of the layer. And if I open up the contents and I open up the rectangle, you guys can see we've got a bunch of other things. And this is really where we do all of our movement and all of our cool things. So I want you guys to start to forget about the properties panel, because that's really basic. And that only allows you to change so much. Instead, we're going to be changing things from down here because there's so much more to change. So if I go down into my rectangle, I can obviously see my add button, which I'll explain in just a second, but I've got my rectangle path. Now under my rectangle path, I've got size, I've got position, and I've got roundness. Okay, so this affects the sizing of my rectangle, the position of the rectangle, and the roundness of it. So I can round off the edges, I can make it super round, I can make it lightly round. Okay, so let's make it slightly round. Now under this, you're going to see two things. You're going to see stroke and you're going to see fill. The stroke is a tab that's added if you've enabled stroke. You can open it up. You could change the stroke color over here. You can change the stroke opacity. You can change the stroke width. You can change the kind of stroke you have. And you can also add more settings. You can add dashes. Now dashes basically are what they are. They are dashes. And if I click on the plus sign, I can add in dashes on my screen. I can change the length of the dash, I can change the offset of the dash, so on and so forth. And everything can be keyframed, by the way, so you can do a ton of cool animations with this stuff. Under it, you've got your taper and you've got your wave, which I won't be explaining. But you guys can see under the stroke, there's a lot more settings than the properties. And that's why we end up using here. Now, let's say you don't want a stroke on your rectangle. How do you remove it? Well, you just select this and you click on delete or backspace and you delete that from your scene. Now you've got your fill. Inside of your fill, you can change the fill color and the fill opacity, and that's just generally about it. And then finally, you've got your transform, which controls the transform functions of all of your rectangle. So when you add a shape layer, it is basically a layer that allows you to add shapes inside of it. And if we're going with a rectangle, we can change a few things. We can go down here and we can change the stroke, we can change the fill, the roundness of the rectangle, and we can change a bunch of cool things with the stroke. We can add dashes to it. All these settings are available down here, which we will be exploring later on, so don't even worry too much about it. But there's just so much you could do with a rectangle. Now you guys might be wondering, what's this add button over here? Well, you guys notice we deleted the stroke. If you want to add it again, you just click on this button here and you have a bunch of settings. You can add inside of your shape layer. By the way, this add is not for your rectangle. Notice how your rectangle is under the contents and on the layer of the contents is your add. So this add function doesn't add things to your rectangle, it adds things to the entire shape layer. Okay, so just keep that thing in mind. What do I mean by this? Well, if I selected my same shape layer, remember a layer is something that holds shapes, right? And I selected, let's say, my ellipse tool, and I drew out a circle right here. You guys are going to notice under my contents, I now have ellipse 1 and rectangle 1. Which now means that I've got two shapes inside of one layer. And if I make this invisible, both of them go away. And if I wanted to change my ellipse, I can just open my ellipse tab and I've got my ellipse path, I've got my stroke, I've got my fill, and the same exact settings, right? The same like color of the stroke, opacity, stroke, width, dashes, taper, like all the exact same stuff. I'm gonna go to my stroke and delete that. And now I've got an ellipse and a rectangle right next to each other. Now let's go ahead and close them down. You guys can see both of them. Now check this out. If I change the layer transform of the entire shape layer, both of them move. But let's say I wanted to put one of them on the left side and one of them on the right side. I could do this physically. Like if you guys understand this easier, you could just, I believe you double click on it and then you just, move each one wherever you want. But how do you do this inside of the program? Very simple. You go down under contents and you don't use this big transform, which controls the entire layer, right? You guys can see. Instead, we use the small transform under the ellipse, like this, like the transform ellipse over here, which we can move. And we use the transform under the rectangle, like the transform over here, which we can move. So I'm hoping this is starting to make sense. Inside of your shape layer, you've got shapes, and inside of these shapes, you've got a bunch of different settings that you can change. That's literally all that it is. And this add button over here just adds things that you can use. These are functions that you can use on top of our shapes. Like for example, I can add a fill function, right? And if the fill function falls under our rectangle, that's going to mean that the fill applies to our rectangle. If the fill function falls under our ellipse, it means now it's outside our ellipse. But if I add it to our ellipse, that means the fill function is now going to apply to our ellipse. Now there are two fills inside of these, so these work the exact same as layers. So since my fill 1 is a dark gray color and my fill 2 is a red, if my fill 2 is on top of my fill 1, it's going to make the color of the rectangle a fill 2, which is red. As soon as I place this under, which is right here, all of a sudden the fill 1's on top of it and the fill 1 dominates, okay? So it's the exact same with this. If I place my fill 2 under my ellipse over here, so inside of my ellipse, it falls under my fill 1, which is a gray, and if I place the fill 2 on top of the fill 1, you can see it changes color. So you can actually add a fill color to your mask, and you might wonder why that is. And that's because you can actually delete the fill color, and you won't delete the mask. You haven't deleted the shape layer. Yes, you can't see it because there's no fill, but you actually still have a shape layer. And actually, I can actually go in and I can add not just a fill, I can add a stroke, right? I can add a stroke of, let's say 2, like this. And now I've got a stroke on both of them. Nice and simple, right? There are so many things that you can add. You can also add in gradient fills. Gradient fills are gradients which you can use to color in your layers. And the way that gradients work is very simple. You have a start point, so a point at which the color starts, and an end point, a point at which the color ends, and you can't see them. Over here, that's the endpoint, for example, and you've got an opacity and you've got the fill colors, right? That's nice and simple. Now there's a few different effects that we can use to add in our gradients, but that's kind of how the shape layers work. So let's quickly recap everything we know about the rectangle and then we'll move on to the rest of them, okay? Now we can add in a new shape layer, and a shape layer is a layer that holds in a shape. If I want to draw in a rectangle, I will draw in a rectangle like so. Now let's say it has a stroke that I don't like. All I have to do is go down to my contents, and under it I've got my rectangle, and I'm going to delete my stroke. Let's say I accidentally deleted my fill and I don't like that. I can click on add and add in my fill once again. Now my fill, I can change this color to a light gray. Perfect. Let's say it's too squarey and I want to make it round. All I do is I go into my rectangle path, and increase the roundness. Now notice one thing. The fill color that we added, because we haven't assigned it to a specific shape, it got added inside of the layer, okay? So notice, check this out. If I close all these, it's added under rectangle, not inside of it. When I place it inside of rectangle, then it only applies to the rectangle. So I can use this shape layer to add anything else I need, okay? This being said, shapes like rectangles are not the only shapes you can have. As a matter of fact, I could select that rectangle and delete it. And now I've got a shape layer without a shape. So we're back to 0.0. Let's go and check out the other ones that you can add. You can add in a rounded rectangle. Now, I personally don't like rounded rectangles because I think they are pointless. The way that they are made is if we just go ahead and zoom in, you guys can see, if we double click on the actual shape, okay, it doesn't want to show us here, but a rounded rectangle, when you add it to a shape layer, it's just a regular rectangle with just some roundness. But when you add it as a mask, it's this rectangle with 2 points on the edges to make it round. Don't worry, we'll be needing it when we need it, okay? We probably won't be using this. There's just many better ways to go about this, okay? If we go under it, we've got the ellipse tool. The ellipse tool is basically just a circle. It allows you to do ovals and cool stuff like this. If you want to make a circle, remember, just hold down shift and you draw this and you get a circle. Let's once again say I don't like the stroke. I can go in here and tone it down, right? All of the exact same stuff. Your ellipse path controls the functions. You don't have roundness here because it's literally a circle. You've got size and position, and then you've got your stroke settings, so color, opacity, stroke width, and then if you want to add dashes, you can also go for this, and then you've got your fill settings, which are nice and basic. So this being said, that is how your ellipse works. Let's go ahead and delete that. Under it, you've got your polygon tool. Now your polygon tool just draws out a polygon with, I believe, 5 sides. That's kind of how it works. So you can basically just draw in whichever polygon you want. I'm going to just draw one out right here from the center. Now this is what a polygon looks like. It's nice and simple. You can come up with some really cool animations with this. It's called a poly star. Now under the polygon, it gets a bit more interesting. If you want to change this shape, you can change the points you've got on here. So you can make them higher points. The more, obviously the higher you go, the closer you're going to get to a circle. Or you can just go all the way down. You could go with 3 points, for example. And you're going to get a triangle, right? Because that's a kind of polygon. You can also change its position down here and its rotation to you can change its outer radius, and its outer radius is just basically like how large it is. That's the easiest way to explain it. Like if I have a complex polygon here and I change the outer radius, it gets big, nice and simple. And you can also change the outer roundness. The outer roundness is where the two edges meet, so where those points meet, how round is that intersection. And as I increase it, you guys can see, right, we can get some pretty interesting shapes. Like if I increase this a lot and I click on S to scale it down, you guys can see we get a pretty weird shape. But this being said, that is it for your polygons. Your polygons are pretty confusing. You can also change the stroke, which is the regular settings, and the fill, which are your regular settings, and the transformed, which are your regular settings. So by now you guys are used to the stroke, fill, and transform. So you understand under the stroke inside of your shape layer, you've got your stroke settings, your stroke width, stroke opacity, stroke color, and dashes. And under your fill, you've got your fill settings, which is the color of the actual shape layer, or whichever shape you drew, and your transform settings, which transform the shape inside, right? Let's go and delete that. The final one we've got is a star. Now the star tool is just a polygon with a certain amount of points, but with intersections in the middle. That's basically all it is. So we're not going to talk about this because you're basically not going to need it, okay? Now there's one more thing to cover, which is the pen tool. What about the pen tool? Let's say we covered all of these different shapes. I'm going to give you guys an actionable step to do so you can practice this. But what about the pen tool? Well, the pen tool allows you to draw your own shape. If you select the pen tool by default like this, it gives you a pen that can add it comes with this shape icon, the star icon right next to it. And this is a pen that can add points. So if I add a point here, 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 and then I tie it back, you guys can see it draws out my shape. Now, what has it added inside of my shape? I can go down in contents. The contents of my shape layer, remember, show me what shape is inside of my shape layer. And if I go into shape 1, I can change the path. I could select the path. I can change different points by selecting my cursor and moving different points around. Okay, and then I can change the stroke around my path, which is the same settings we got used to: stroke color, opacity, width, and dashes. And then I can change the fill of my path, like the actual color. And I can also change the transform. So it works just like a shape layer. The only difference is that the actual shape, there's no definitive shape, like you actually went and drew this. And let's say I don't like it. Well, there's a million pens you can use. You can use a pen to add more vertexes, right? Add more vertexes inside of your shape. You can use a pen over here to delete the vertexes, like this one and this one, which is useless. You can use a pen to convert vertexes. So this is if you guys want to make this a smoother corner. And you can use a pen to mask off edges, which we're not going to worry about. But the main four that you guys are going to worry about is the pen which allows you to draw shapes, the pen which adds vertexes, the pen which deletes vertexes, and the pen which converts. And there's also like shortcuts for all of these. I believe that Alt allows you to, so if you have a regular pen selected and you hold down Alt, you can actually like make these more curvy, like that. I believe Shift is one of them. I believe by default, if you select it, you could just move it around. I have forgotten the rest, I'll be honest with you. Yeah, holding down Control will allow you to delete them. So that's your shortcut for all of these. But for now, you can just manually choose them to kind of get used to them up front. So with this being said, that is pretty much it for shape layers. Now let's go ahead and wrap our head around it a bit more. I want you guys to follow along with me real quick so that we can practice this. I want you on this specific scene to create 3 shape layers, okay? I want 3 different shapes. You don't have to make them in 3 different shape layers, but you do have to make them in 3 different shapes. First of all, I want a rounded rectangle in the top of the screen. I want it to have a light gray fill with a very light white stroke around it. The second thing I want is I want a circle in the middle of the screen. I want this to have no fill and just to be an outline. And the third thing I want is a triangle in the bottom of the screen, and I want this to be a slightly darker fill with no stroke. Okay, let's go and get to work on it. So the first one is I'm going to right click and add in a new shape layer. There's 2 ways to go about this. If you guys want to do them all inside of one shape layer, we can. But I want to get you guys used to making them in multiple shape layers. So inside of shape layer 1, we're going to start with our rectangle. So I'm going to select my tool over here and hold it down and click on rectangle. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle up top over here while holding down Shift to make it a square. There we go. So for the square, as we mentioned, we want it to be rounded, which means we go into contents, rectangle, open up the rectangle, open rectangle path, and increase the roundness. That looks pretty good. Okay, awesome. Now the second thing I wanted was a very light stroke, and my stroke right now is big. So I'm going to tone down this stroke width down to 4, which looks amazing. The second thing I wanted now is a circle in the middle of the screen with just an outline, no fill. How do I go about this? I can just right click, add a new shape layer like this. And now I've got another shape layer which I can draw inside of it. Then we're going to select our ellipse tool and we're going to hold down shift to draw a perfect circle in the middle of the screen like this. Now that we have a perfect circle in the middle, we want no fill, but we want an outline. So I'm going to go down to my contents under my ellipse, open it up, and I'm just going to select the fill and backspace, delete it. Now we just have an outline. Now around my stroke, I'm going to tone it down to like 7, which should be pretty good. Awesome. And now finally, we wanted a triangle in the bottom of the screen. So let's go ahead and close this down. Let's right click and add in a new shape layer. Then let's select our polygon tool, draw a polygon over here, open up the polystar, open up the polystar path, and drop the points to how many points does a triangle have? 3. Perfect. Now we're going to rotate it. Since our transform function is down here, I'm going to rotate my shape and just place it down here in the bottom of the screen, like so. Now we wanted this one with no stroke, so I'm selecting the stroke and backspace to delete it. And then we're going to select the fill and we're going to change the color to a darker gray, as we mentioned in the beginning. And there we go. That is pretty good. And ladies and gentlemen, that basically teaches you everything about shape layers. Remember, shape layers are just a layer that holds a certain shape inside of it. And there are a few shapes which you can place inside of a layer. You've got rectangles, you've got circles, you've got triangles, polygons, and you can change their sides. For rectangles, you can make them more round, or you can go into the fill options, which are the same for all shape layers. The fill options, which are the same for all shape layers, are stroke and fill. Your stroke allows you to control the stroke color, stroke opacity, stroke width, and also add dashes if you want. Your fill options allow you to control the fill color of the shape, and if you guys don't want that, and you can delete it and you can mess around with those. Or you can just click on the add button and add in some more functions. Now real quick, by the way, for the functions in the add, there's a whole bunch. There's like a lot we could go into, especially these ones over here, trim paths, and you can also add in like a round corners function, so on and so forth. But ideally, I'll be honest with you guys, when I make advanced animations, I basically never use this. I only use this to add a fill or a stroke, or I don't even use it for gradients. Like there's a separate effect that's way better for gradients we're gonna learn later. I just use it for the trim paths, and the trim paths function you guys will learn later on. Okay, so don't worry too much about that. So with this being said, that is how you add a shape. So you guys now, like, check out how much you learn. You guys now know how to use text inside of After Effects. You know how to add in text and change its properties. And that's easy for you because you have that from Premiere Pro. You understand to stylize it. You could do that with the properties panel, which you already know, with effects, which you are about to learn in a separate course, and with the animator tool, which you guys are going to learn later on in other courses. Then you understand that how you can add solids, and you can understand you can stylize solids with 2 ways, either the properties, which you guys understood very easily, or the effects, which we have a separate course on. And then you understood you can add in shape layers, which are layers that hold in shapes and draw out different shapes and have different settings for different shapes. And you understand how to use all of those, and you understand to stylize them. You can use basically the shape layer properties and add effects to them, which we are going to learn in other courses. There's one final function that you guys need to learn, which is the adjustment layers. And adjustment layers are very simple and very straightforward. For that reason, I'm going to dive into them in the next course. So with this being said, guys, let's dive into adjustment layers and have our first ever actionable step where we're going to recap all of this information and put it all together in good use. So with this being said, you're doing good progress for a beginner, and let's go ahead and dive right into adjustment layers. See you guys in the next course.